Alright, hello and welcome to Camel Finance. I'm your boy Camel, and before we dive into this, I wanted to point this out. Peter Schiff has had his bank refuse his service, his custom. They've closed his account on him, and there's nothing he can do about it. And I just thought it was funny. I thought there was some level of karma in here, because although I absolutely respect this man as an economist, and I love the fact that he's so outspoken in calling out the Fed on their BS and their criminal activity and their complete Ponzi scheme of an economy that we've got going on. I really respect him and respect his opinion on everything apart from Bitcoin, but he does exist in a state of having an enormous conflict of interest, and that's why he's so fond of bashing Bitcoin. So I just thought, for all the time he spent bashing Bitcoin, like now he's, without even seemingly realized it, he's tweeted this to say, look, we've got shut out of my bank account and I didn't do anything wrong. They're investigating me for crimes that there's no evidence of. And the answer is, you should have bought Bitcoin at $10, $100, $1,000, like Max told you to. So I just thought that was kind of funny. There's a little bit of karma. Anyway, huge news today. I covered this on the last video, I think, although I just kind of skipped over it, but I've prepared a little presentation for it today because this is enormous. The Bank for International Settlements is said to allow banks, central banks, to keep 1% of their reserves in Bitcoin. So first of all, Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, right? Who are they? The Bank for International Settlement is an international financial institution owned by the central banks that fosters international monetary and financial cooperation and serves as a bank for the central banks. Okay, so it's the central bank boss. That's what the BIS is. On the board of directors, this is straight from their website. You can go and look these people up. I'd encourage you to do so. But I'll just give you the ones that I recognise straight off the bat. Andrew Bailey, Haruhiko Kuroda, Christine Lagarde, and Jerome Powell. You may have heard of some of these. Andrew Bailey, of course, being the governor of the Bank of England. Christine Lagarde is the president of the ECB, the European Central Bank, former IMF, of course. Jay Powell, everyone knows Jay Powell, especially if you watch this channel, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Central Bank of America. And Haruhiko Kuroda is, of course, the governor of the Bank of Japan. And so that list is extensive. You know, all of these people carry roughly the same sort of power in their respective areas. So I'd encourage you to go and check those out. But ultimately, the BIS is the central bank boss. It's the central bank to central banks. So scrolling down here, it says, despite its skeptical approach to digital currencies, exacerbated by the recent cryptocurrency market crash, it looks like the Bank for International Settlements intends to extend its hand to a new asset class by allowing banks to hold up to 1% of reserves in cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. The BIS's Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, BCBS, has made the proposal limiting the bank's total exposure to what they call Group 2 crypto assets to 1% of Tier 1 capital in its document named the Second Consultation on the Prudential Treatment of Crypto Assets. And I've got that document here, as you can see. And what's interesting about this is if you run a search in this for Bitcoin, you will see that this document actually explicitly names Bitcoin one time, and it names it under Group 2 exposure limit. And you can see here, provisional limit set, 1% of Tier 1 capital, so on and so forth, as the article says. So it also has this diagram here that it splits crypto assets in Group 1 and Group 2. I'm not going to go through all of this. The thing you need to understand is that Bitcoin falls underneath the Group 2 classification, and the Group 2 exposure limit, I've highlighted here, shows the introduction of an exposure limit which will initially limit a bank's total exposure to Group 2 crypto assets to 1% of their Tier 1 capital. And so another question you might have is, what is the Tier 1 capital that they talk about, allocating 1% of their Tier 1 capital? Tier 1 capital represents the core equity assets of the bank or financial institution, and it's largely composed of disclosed reserves. So in other words, their reserves, their assets that they own, their reserve assets, form their Tier 1 capital. So they are indeed saying that they are going to put 1% of their reserve assets into Bitcoin, up to 1%. And so scrolling down a bit further, Group 1 versus Group 2, they sort of go on to explain this, and they've even lifted the thing straight out of the document, but I thought it was nice to show it to you straight out of the official document. But here it is anyway. You scroll down a bit more, And it says there, the total exposure to Group 2 will be subject to an exposure limit. Banks must apply this exposure limit to their aggregate exposures to the Group 2 crypto assets, including both direct holdings, cash and derivative, and indirect holdings. And so, what is the Basel Committee? Well, the Basel Committee is the Committee of Banking Supervision, the BCBS, and the primary global standard setter for the prudential regulation of banks. So this is really, really big news. We're talking the central bank boss putting in framework for central banks to allocate 1% of money. And stick around because I'm going to show you just how much money 1% of this money is and the enormous numbers that are about to flow into Bitcoin over the coming year or two. And so just before we get into the actual numbers for what this could do to the price of Bitcoin, or what this will do most likely to the price of Bitcoin, it's important to just make this point here that this is enormous progress, not just because this is adoption, not just because that we're going to see large inflows of capital into Bitcoin and into the network, not just because this gains credibility for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is clearly here to stay, okay? This is, if central banks are going to put this on their reserve asset balance sheet, then this is clearly here to stay. If they're going to allocate tier 1 capital, this is not going anywhere. Even though, if you speak to a lot of people, they will tell you Bitcoin's quite risky. Like, there's a good chance it doesn't survive, so on and so forth, right? But this is also such an achievement because these banks have been particularly skeptical towards cryptocurrency. So we are finally seeing the banks have to fold. If they don't hold Bitcoin, then they're going to get left behind because other places will. We've seen this in El Salvador, Mexico making it legal tender just recently. This is a trend that's going to continue. And if these banks don't start to protect themselves against inflation in other ways, and if they allow game theory to play out, then they're going to get left behind. And so what does this look like in terms of numbers? Well, total global assets are around 900 trillion. If Bitcoin captures 5% of this, that would be $45 trillion to flow into Bitcoin market cap. Of course, Bitcoin currently sitting around 1 trillion. And then divide this number by the number of coins, 21 million, and you get $2 million. Of course, if you watch this channel, you know this number is really 17 million, so this number will be a lot bigger. Also, think about it this way. If all the global assets are 900 trillion, 1% of these reserve assets is 9 trillion. If 9 trillion flows in, that takes Bitcoin to approximately a $10 trillion market cap, which is roughly 18x where we are today. Okay? 18x. That puts us well over 300k. So make no mistake, this next cycle was always destined to be the cycle, and there's not a doubt in my mind that it is coming. I'll leave you with this. Bitcoin just won. Won what? Everything. The boss of the central banks just approved Bitcoin as a reserve asset. It goes like this. The Bank for International Settlement, then central banks, then your bank. The ones ruling the financial system green-lighted Bitcoin. So if you found value here today, I'd appreciate if you could drop a like on the video. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already. Follow me on Twitter if you're not already. And if you have anything to say, if you agree, if you disagree, if you're excited, if you think this is not that big of a deal, then feel free to throw that in the comments. Let me know what you think. I'd be interested to hear from you. And if not, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Happy 4th of July to all the brothers and sisters over the pond. And look after yourselves. Take care. All the best. Cheers.